Well, I want to thank everybody for being here. We gathered today at a crime lab and drug lab location hosted by the Texas Department of Public Safety here in Harris County. I want to thank those with us today, including the Director of the Texas Department of Public Safety, Steve McCraw, the Montgomery County Sheriff, Rand Henderson, Senators Huffman and Betancourt, as well as Brian Bennett, he's the narcotics commander for the Houston Police Department, and Jennifer Hatch, a forensic scientist with the Texas Department of Public Safety. This DPS lab that we are at today much of it is either fentanyl or other types of drugs that are laced with fentanyl. I have in front of me several different examples, some of which are straight up fentanyl drugs, some of which are drugs that look like they would be some other type of drug that have fentanyl laced onto them. Regardless, they're all either extraordinarily dangerous or completely deadly. This DPS team that we have in this building facility today, they help to keep drugs like this off the streets, making Texas safer. The fact of the matter is, Mexican drug cartels, they smuggle fentanyl into our country any way that they can. They cram it into things like car batteries or into tires of cars. They lace it onto street drugs. And as this lab has discovered, they also lace it onto or make it look like drugs that are typical prescription drugs. These brave folks in this lab, they handle literally lethal doses of these drugs every day to help save the lives of our fellow Texans from the deadly scourge of fentanyl. Now, it's because of Washington's open border policies that deadly fentanyl is flooding the United States. Fentanyl does not derive from Texas or from the United States. It comes across the border from Mexico, and it's killing Texans, and it's getting worse. Here's some numbers and some examples. In 2019, just a few years ago, there were 277 fentanyl deaths in Texas. Just 3 years later, in 2022, make that 2021, there were almost 1,700. Most of those deaths were in counties that are not along the border. So what comes across the border typically does not stay in the border region. It makes its way to places like Harris County, Montgomery County, and across the entire state of Texas. In fact, if you will look at this map over here, all of the pink locations, pink or red, those are counties in the state of Texas where just DPS alone has made fentanyl seizures over the course of the past year. Now, that doesn't count law enforcement agencies such as the Montgomery County Law Enforcement or the Harris County Law Enforcement or other local law enforcement. If you look at all the law enforcement together, you probably would find almost every county in the state would be colored as a location where fentanyl has been seized. Fentanyl seizures by DPS have literally skyrocketed. Get these numbers in just a 1 year differential. In 2020, DPS seized about 70 pounds of fentanyl. 1 year later, in 2021, they seized more than 964 pounds of fentanyl. That's more than a 1,000% increase in fentanyl seizures in just 1 year. And the number of lethal doses seized is almost enough to kill every man, woman, and child in the United States of America. Fentanyl is so deadly, it's now the #1 killer of the population group of 18 to 45 in the United States of America. Now, this past spring, I met with Virginia Krieger, whose daughter was tragically killed by fentanyl poisoning. Earlier this year, also in Austin, Texas, 12 people who were out partying on 6th Street were taken to the hospital. 3 of them died from fentanyl poisoning. And it's been reported that on average, One person dies every single day in Harris County because of fentanyl. As a state, we are escalating our crackdown on this deadly drug. This last session, I signed a law that I think that Senator Huffman was the author of, to increase penalties for making or distributing fentanyl. Also, we have made seizing fentanyl a core component of Operation Lone Star that Director Steve McCraw is in charge of, where he and Texas Department of Public Safety officers, they are involved in this massive seizure of fentanyl. Importantly, this is not just a border problem. It's a problem that affects every state in the United States of America. Communities across our country are mired in this tragedy, whether it be schools or neighborhoods or families. They're all touched by the deadliness of fentanyl. As just some recent headlines shows the breadth of this problem. One, and I quote, 15,000 fentanyl pills were seized and 11 suspects arrested in a North Texas drug bust. And one from nearby, Texas teens die from fentanyl overdose weeks before their high school graduation. Fentanyl is deadly. It is spreading, and Texas is fighting back. But a core part of my message today is law enforcement alone is not going to be enough to make sure that we reduce the use and spread of fentanyl. One of the most important tools that we have as a state to help us deal with the spread of fentanyl is parents. I'm urging parents across the state right now to know that your kids are going to parties, and at those parties, pills are being traded and used. And what you don't know and what your child does not know is whether or not a pill that they are given at that party is laced with deadly fentanyl. It's so important that as parents, you play a role in making sure that you educate your children about the deadliness of fentanyl and the way that it can be laced on a drug in ways in which they have no possibility of discerning whether or not fentanyl is on that drug. Now, with us here today is a leader who has helped us to address these challenges, and that is Senator Joan Huffman from here in the Houston area.
Thank you, Governor, and thank you for being here and leading the fight and the cause against fentanyl and so forth. And I want to thank the media for being here, and it's heartening to see such a large media presence today, because as Governor Abbott says, we cannot stress enough how important it is for parents, for families, to understand that this could happen to your child. We look at these fentanyl deaths, they have increased. We know in 2021 there were over 480 fentanyl unintentional overdoses right here in Harris County. These deaths cross races, they cross demographics, they cross neighborhoods, suburban, urban, wealthy, lower economic status. Everyone is being affected by this. It could be your child, it could be any child. We have tried, we made some progress last session by increasing the penalties, and I was heartened to hear from some law enforcement and prosecutors that it is being used across the state. But as the numbers have grown, we are seeing it's not enough. So we will be working next session on increasing the penalties even more, looking at really focusing in on those who are distributing and manufacturing these drugs. We know that it's coming across the border. We do know that. We know that a lot of the ingredients that make up these drugs come from China into Mexico, being brought across our Texas border, and it goes throughout the United States. Not all staying in Texas, but we know, we can see from the numbers that it's killing Texans. So we'll be working on enhancing penalties, and importantly, looking at other jurisdictions, other states who are looking at it as a type of poisoning, and how we can prosecute those who put this poison into our streets and into our schools and into where our kids are dying from it. So again, thank you for being here. This is a fight that we need to take on together as Texans. Everyone in this room needs to get this message out. We're in this together. We must stop this for the sake because it just keeps getting worse and worse. We must protect our children from this. Thank you.
Thank you. And now the director of the Texas Department of Public Safety, who is leading the statewide law enforcement effort to crack down on fentanyl.
Thank you, Governor. It was 6 years ago we started talking about fentanyl. I know you were concerned because for some reason we're seeing nationally this epidemic of overdoses by fentanyl. We saw it in the Great Lakes states, we saw it in the Northeast, we saw it in the Southeast, and we certainly saw it in the Mid-Atlantic region as well. And your concern then, as it was now, is that this is so potent that it can take lives immediately and people not realize the impact that are having. And the only thing that's different, at the time, Texas did not, we were a transit state, we're certainly for the rest of the nation. As fentanyl comes in, as goes Texas, so goes the rest of the nation. Mexican cartels, this is clearly their job. They've been exploiting this particular thing. But one thing has changed in recent years is that the Mexican cartels figured another way to distribute fentanyl. It's not just in powder form, and not just in lacing cocaine with methamphetamine. Just, hey, why not counterfeit pills? You know, why not Xanax? You know, why not, you know, hydromorphone, Oxycontin? Very simple. And by doing it, and they don't care how many milligrams they put in a dose, as long as they're making money. And by doing it, they're able to make a lot of money. And of course, from a Texas standpoint, now you've got kids, and thank you, Governor, for talking to the kids and the families. And if you're a parent or grandparent, talk to your kids, absolutely, because it's worse than Russian roulette in terms of statistically. You know, they're more likely to die from a counterfeit, you know, pill produced in Mexico than anything else if they take it. And we're concerned about that. I know you're concerned about that. But that's the difference right now. Mexican cartels are doing this. They're putting it on our streets. And unknown kids, unwilling kids, are taking it. And it only takes one to kill. I think DEA came up with what one pill kills. I think that's an appropriate, and hopefully the parents and grandparents are picking this up and they're having these conversations with kids. And that's it, Governor. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For your leadership.
And now a forensic scientist at DPS, right here at the lab that we're at, Jennifer Hatch.
Thank you, Governor Abbott, for coming to the laboratory today to see what we do. I also wanted to thank you and the legislature as well for the resources that you've provided us to ensure that we can continue to provide our services for the state of Texas. So it's important for the public to get to look at the work that we do here at the Crime Lab and the impact that it does have on the community. To give a little more background into fentanyl, fentanyl is a synthetic opioid that is similar to other opiates that you're used to hearing about, such as heroin, morphine, oxycodone, but the biggest difference is fentanyl is so much more potent than these other opiates. Fentanyl is approximately 30 times more potent than heroin and 60 times more potent than morphine. So that means it doesn't take very much fentanyl for you to feel an effect from it as a user. So only 2 milligrams of fentanyl, which I have in here, could be considered a lethal dose. For comparison, 60 milligrams of heroin, which is demonstrated here, is a lethal dose. So you can see how little it takes. All of our laboratories across the state of Texas are seeing an increased number of cases that do contain fentanyl. While fentanyl isn't present in everything that we analyze, it is much more prominent today than it was even 5 years ago. So as an example, in 2019, we reported fentanyl or a fentanyl analog in about 94 cases. In 2022, through the end of June, so just those 6 months alone, we've already reported about 513 cases. So that's a pretty significant increase. The majority of fentanyl that we do see today is pressed into these tablets that look like legitimate pharmaceuticals. Traditionally, these tablets are made to look like oxycodone, as shown here, hydrocodone, or even Xanax. And I can say that these counterfeit tablets look like legitimate pharmaceuticals. Even a scientist examining these daily usually cannot tell the difference until we do our analysis. So this means also that most users don't realize that what they're getting is a counterfeit tablet containing fentanyl as well. So you can see how easily this does become a very dangerous issue. So increasing this awareness about fentanyl is helping to save lives. So I just want to thank you again, Governor Abbott, and to the Texas legislature for your efforts to help bring this crisis into the forefront.
Thank you, and thank you for what you do every day. And I got to meet the other people who work in the lab. And once again, I want to express my gratitude for the men and women who work in this lab, who put their lives on the line to work with the law enforcement officers to make sure that we as a state are going to be more effective in cracking down on the pushers of fentanyl across this region and across our state. We'll take a few questions. Go ahead.
Governor Abbott,
yet? Do you have plans to return? And anything about it?
Sure. So listen, I've been there multiple times to Uvalde for multiple purposes, sometimes for public presentations, sometimes for grieving events and different things like that. And I will be going many more times. We've been setting up a lot of facilities to make sure that we're providing every possible avenue of caring for the victims, such as a $5 million center to provide mental health care as well as other types of health care. But also importantly, working to make sure that they're going to know all the facts of everything that happened in what led to the loss of their family member. Knowing what happened is the first step toward being able to go through the grieving process, but then having access to the types of resources the state's going to provide, which is going to be an ongoing basis. This is not something where this is going to last a month or two. This is something where we will be involved with the city of Uvalde for years going forward. And I made that clear to them from the very beginning, and we will live up to that.
Many of the family members say that they're.
So obviously it's disgusting to see what happened. And it's been clear from the time of Columbine that whenever there is a shooting, like what was happening in this school, you run toward that danger and encounter that danger, and you have to eliminate the shooter as quickly as possible. From what I have seen from the video, it looks like that policy was not followed. There are ongoing investigations at multiple levels. One is a law enforcement investigation that involves the Texas Rangers as well as the FBI, as well as the United States Department of Justice. We need to see the results of that investigation. There's also an investigation that's being undertaken by the local district attorney. We need to see the results of that investigation. And there are investigations that are being conducted by both the Texas House and Texas Senate. It's my understanding that the investigation by the Texas House will be presented to the families this Sunday. And it's important for the families to learn firsthand what that investigation has turned up so far. But we do know that it will take a while before all of the investigations are concluded.
Governor,
Many
you said
family
you were,
members have said
Governor,
they've
you
lost
said you were livid
confidence.
about the misinformation you received on the 27th. After watching that video, it's completely opposite as to what you were told. How do you feel about that now that you've seen the video?
Well, just as angry because it's clear that what was shown on the video was the exact opposite of the information that I was given on the day that I went out and explained what happened during the event. And so the information that was provided to me before telling the public about what happened, none of the information that was in that video was shared with me on that day. And so it was shocking.
Many of the families have said that they have lost confidence that they will get the full truth as to what happens when confronted with so much contradictory information from both elected officials and law enforcement.
And that's why I said, and you may have heard, that I was pretty adamant earlier this week about the disclosure of this video, because it's important for the people of Uvalde to know exactly what happened. In this case, unlike some other cases, we have visual evidence, we have audio evidence that will reveal most of what happened. In addition to that, these investigations will turn up different pieces of information, and they're working on a minute-by-minute timeline of exactly what happened. And the families of the victims, they deserve to know exactly what happened, and they will know what happened.
When can the families expect to get a full account of how every single officer, well, officer, trooper, constable's deputy, responding to the school, not just the ones that
Sure.
we've seen on the video?
Sure. It'll take a while, and the reason is because it will require a conclusion of the investigation by the Texas Rangers, by the FBI, by the DOJ, by the district attorney, as well as by things that are learned by the Texas House and Texas Senate investigations. And so there are a lot of investigations going on. And then when you compare the notes from all these different investigations, you will see all the facts come together. And the families will continue to learn more about that. But they need to be able to know all of this information. And so I'm glad they're learning about it. The way that the videotape was revealed was inconsistent with what the Texas House had planned. But it is important that they do begin to learn exactly what happened.
Governor,
Two
did
more
you
questions.
Governor,
Two more questions. Governor, can we get a question on operational start?
Sure.
in any way that this would interfere with the federal agent's job?
So I'll answer the question in part for the numbers. I'll have Director McCraw share with you what the numbers are so far. And so the way that it works is very simple. We have multiple strategies that we use. One strategy that we use is to turn away migrants before they even make it to the Texas border. The other is to put up barriers so that if they make it past the halfway point, they will not make it onto the Texas land. Others are, if they do make it onto Texas land and they're trespassing, they can be arrested for that. But others, if they're not apprehended by Border Patrol, they're now going to be apprehended by Texas DPS and returned to the border. And that's exactly what Director McCraw and DPS officers have been working on achieving beginning a couple of days ago. And you can give the updated numbers.
903 right now. It's probably higher than that, but at least 903 that we've moved back to the ports of entry. And this helps us immediately because we're not waiting hours for Border Patrol to come get them at that point in time. So not just in terms of detention and referral, but we're able to move them quickly, and TDCJ using their buses move them to that location at that point in time. We're able to get back on the road.
Last
In this case, back on the river.
Leaking into the legitimate pharmaceutical. Is there any chance
So our
this
Jersey
illicit
investigative
fentanyl?
team worked on a series called 23 Days. It's a number of days it took for the Florida legislature to make changes to gun laws and mental health issues. It's now been 7 weeks since the tragedy at Robb Elementary School. Where do you stand on this now? What do you hope changes? And what do you promise Texans who are suffered by this tragedy that you're going to do?
Well, there's two things working in parallel, at least two things working in parallel. One, obviously, is what the United States Congress worked on, achieved, and passed. Second is I requested the Texas House and Senate to begin working on proposed legislation on a multitude of different topics. They've been having hearings, they've been making progress, and I expect that progress to continue. And once they work on those, some of those will lead to very meaningful results. And so we hope to achieve some results. That said, there's some things that must be done before the school year begins. And these are already being implemented subject to my executive orders. And that is, every school in the state of Texas needs to be inspected and evaluated for public safety. Schools need to live up to the public safety standards that we put into law in the aftermath of prior shootings. Many schools, or let's say at least some schools, are not living up to. And so we have teams that are working on inspecting and working with campuses across the state of Texas, because we want to ensure that when students return to school, those schools are going to be safer than they were when they left school at the end of this past year. A second thing that we passed that's proven to be extraordinarily effective, and that is mental health assessment and treatment for students in schools who have exhibited some behavioral problems. The good news is that this program has been implemented in about 300 independent school districts across the state of Texas. It's identified over 1,000 students that have some challenges that could have led to problematic behavior, including one that purportedly could have led to something like a school shooting. A problem is that had not reached far enough to communities like Uvalde. We're working on trying to expedite that so that it can reach more schools before the school year begins.
And briefly, I know you spoke about these committee hearings. I know similar committee hearings were had after Santa Fe. So what's different now? And can you promise people that there's going to be real change in the state of Texas?
Sure. So first, the hearings that are taking place now are different than what happened after Santa Fe. What happened after Santa Fe is that I was the one as governor conducting the hearings. And then I prepared a booklet of my findings that I then gave to the legislature. And I thought about doing that again, but candidly, that just slows down the process. The people who have to reach agreement in shaping the laws are the legislators. And that's why I decided to ask them to go ahead and begin the process of evaluating what happens. Can I tell you that something will get passed that will improve school safety? The answer is 100% yes. And we'll just need to wait and see how quickly agreement can be reached on those programs and exactly what those programs are. However, the status quo is unacceptable and will not be allowed.
Great, thank you guys so much.
Thank you, sir.
Close-up shot of that fentanyl spot or whatever.
Yes.